how you articulate your story is going to be defeatist or it's going to be victorious. Are you the hero, or are you someone that is like a side character and you can't catch a break? And when you recognize that your customer, if we're talking about as a business owner, your customer is the hero of this journey, the only thing they ever really need to know about you is how you are going to help them. But let me give you a concrete example. I had a friend that his name was Steve. Okay. I was talking with him in Cancun at one of our retreats, and he's like, man, I've been part of this community for like a year. I haven't done anything. I'm not very good at real estate. I don't have much of a story. I was like, well, wait a second. Let's see what you have done. Let's talk about your actual results. I asked him a couple of questions about himself, and he's like, well, I've changed my mindset about finances. I've started to increase my cash flow about $1,000 because of the ways that I've been able to utilize some banking strategies. And he actually was in a very much so more secure place because of the education that he'd been taking. And I regurgitated that to him. And I said, what if you shared your story like this? I came down to this community. I was a mess. I didn't understand where I was financially. I was frustrated. I was confused. And when I came through the classes, I was able to get clarity. And that clarity made it so I was able to grip back about an extra $1,000 of cash flow a month. It has made all the difference.
I bet.
That type of a story, someone that beforehand thought they had no story, now it can land, it can impact them in a way that you're like, oh, I have had results. And sometimes those little results, if you phrase it correctly, can have a lasting impact on someone. That's why I'm so passionate about it.
Absolutely. I think as too often we look at there's the gap in the gain principle, right? From Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan, of the idea that we're always looking what we don't have. We're comparing ourselves to other people, living in comparison, and not willing to look back at the gains that we've had, that all the things that we've gotten through to get us here, to help us actually be authorities in this little area of our world. And too often people overlook that. Well, when it comes to creating stories or helping people understand their stories, what do you think is the thing that kind of blocks people the most from seeing their story? I know we just talked about the gap in the gain, but with your experience, what is it that you feel like people are just not seeing? Why are they too close to it? What is it? Is it the lack of feeling like it's special, like anybody would care? What do you think?
There are multiple ways, but what I find most common is people compare themselves to someone's finished product when they're at the beginning. Or maybe they're like barely in the middle. And what's crazy is every single person has an amazing story. And if you really boil it down, the way you share your story will determine whether or not this is something that's impactful or not. You can have someone that's brand new, that's their very first day in any company, any product, and because they made that decision to join, they have a story. There are reasons that they're doing certain things. Maybe it's like, hey, I'd never tried this yogurt before, but as soon as I tried it, I was like, man, I'm hooked. This is my favorite yogurt. Now they just shared a simple story. It's a little testimonial, but those testimonials, because they are real, because it's their experience, nobody else has that exact same experience. And that's for good or bad. So if you could eliminate trying to think, hey, my story isn't as good as somebody else's, and instead say, how can I articulate my story in a way that connects with an audience? How can I make it more relatable? What is it about my story that could help somebody? Or is there something that I experienced that somebody else needs to hear as well? When you're coming from a story from the point of how do I serve rather than what do I get out of this, you're giving a gift to your audience rather than expecting them to give you flowers and throw their praises on stage. It changes the way that you think. I think that's the easiest way to respond to that question.
I like that. I like that a lot. As you were talking, I was thinking about now this podcast is heavily listened to by doctors, orthodontists, private practice owners, amongst others. But one of the things that I talk about quite a bit is this idea of truly understanding your story and telling your story in different aspects of the business. So I'll start with the doctors first. I'll often go and just for fun, I'll go and I'll look at a website, and usually the website has a little bit of an about me, right? And the about me typically is a list of their accolades and where they went to school and this stuff. And then the very, very end has a blurb of, on their off time, they love to spend time with their family and going fishing and, whatever, doing Klondikes with Boy Scouts, whatever. Like, it's like, really, that's not your story. That doesn't tell me anything about you. And it's a waste of space. Like, people literally paid a amount of money for that extra part on their website for that page for nothing. So why would you not tell your story? One of my favorite examples of that, I have a doctor up in Northern California who had redone his entire website. And part of the redo was this story of how he and his wife met in dental school. And it was called Love Amongst the sulfur fumes or something like that. Like, they titled it. And it was their story of both of them telling their side of the story of how they met and who said what and whatever. But it was my favorite part of the whole website, because I was like, man, this is what is going to connect people with you. And I think a lot of times people don't think their story matters as much as it actually does. I had a doctor, also oddly enough, in Northern California, who I remember walking in her office, and she has a picture of, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but back in the day, back in my day, they used to have water ski shows, and they would have women typically who would get in a pyramid on water skis and ski around. So she had a picture of that. And I was like, that's interesting. Why is that there? And she goes, oh, that's me on the top. And it was like a little cutout newspaper type thing. And I went, how is that not all over your website? Like, how do you not have those? Here's about Dr. So-and-so. She used to do this. That stuff makes people go, oh, that's interesting. When people are interesting, people want to find out more about them. And so I just think that stories make you more interesting. And you mentioned something, though, that I think is interesting. What about the stories that we have in our head that stop us from doing stuff, stop us from relationships, the stories that we have that stop us from being successful? Why I can't, right? Sure, Brigham's on here saying you can have short-term rentals or you can tell your story. Well, what's the stories that stop us? How often do you see the stories that are created, because it's all a story?
Oh yeah, it's all story.
That stops us from actually going out and getting what we want.
So what's interesting about this question is it's almost always in the language we choose to tell the story. It's not the story itself. So how you articulate your story is going to be defeatist or it's going to be victorious. Are you the hero, or are you someone that is like a side character and you can't catch a break? And when you recognize that your customer, if we're talking about as a business owner, your customer is the hero of this journey, the only thing they ever really need to know about you is how you are going to help them. Are you someone that they can know, like, and trust? Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? Are you going to be able to actually deliver on what you promise? And if you can come down and boil your story down to something that will connect with them, let them know, hey, you know what? I'm a normal person. I'm not perfect. I'm not infallible. We all make mistakes. We all have diverse backgrounds, and it's okay to show a little vulnerability. Like, one of the things that I've noticed with very high level professionals when they start getting into a new space like real estate is they come with this wall. In the language world, we call it the effective filter. It's something that inhibits you from progressing if you're not willing to be open. And because they're a professional here, they're not willing to be a beginner. And if you're not willing to be a beginner at the beginning, you treat yourself as an intermediate level or an advanced expert when you're brand new at something, then you're not actually taking the stepping stones. It's starting at the end rather than at the beginning or even in the middle. So to bring that back, when you're sharing your story, it comes down to what is the most important parts? What are the points? Because there's a story, point, and a solution. If you're sharing a story and there's not a point to the story, why are you sharing the story?
Right.
If it doesn't solve a problem, then that's when you hear someone share a story like, oh, that was a really funny anecdote, but there was no point to it. And then they apologize. How many of you have ever had that experience, right? You
Well,
share a story and then you're like, oh, sorry.
I will say I wish some people would apologize once they recognize they didn't do it. I was at an event recently where I saw a speaker who, due to the popularity of their account on Instagram,
Mhm.
and something, I don't want to call them out, so something specific that happened to them in their life, they're speaking on massive stages in the world. So I'm like, cool. I'm excited to see. I love seeing great speakers. I love seeing people. I love seeing not great speakers because I produce them in my head of what I want to do with it, right?
Mhm.
But I love seeing speakers. I love people taking that risk of getting out there on the tightrope by themselves on a stage and exposing themselves. And this person would do the oddest just asides about a funny tidbit or a funny joke that happened to him, something somebody said that was ridiculous or out of place, and then go back to the story or the training that I was so lost. I was like, wait, did that happen? I feel like I was inside of his brain, and it's like, we're going to have a squirrel moment here. Everybody come with me. I'm going to be distracted here over here, talk about this thing. And then I'll come back and go like, haha. But you could tell also he meant to do that. Like he thought it was a good place to throw in this tidbit that had nothing to do with it. So confusing. So
Yeah.
I wish that he would have said that and done that.
I mean, there are points where you can absolutely use pattern interrupts, right?
Absolute pattern interrupts are huge.
Like, I've got a question for you. I was talking to your brother earlier today.
My brother.
Your brother.
Okay.
Absolutely. I reached out and I was like, all right, so tell me something I need to know about Dino. And he's like,
he doesn't know nothing.
Did you know that
He's
Dino was in a parade? And I was like, what type of parade? Like, was this like a gay pride parade? What are you talking about? He's like, no.
Wait.
Crocodile. He was a crocodile.
Why did you go there first? Why did you go to the gay pride parade thing? That's concerning to me.
No, he's like, it was a crocodile. And I was like, wait, like Peter Pan type of crocodile? I was like, yeah, Disney. So I was like, how did you book that gig? That sounds awesome.
Well, first of all, he's wrong. I was not a crocodile. It was an alligator.
It was an alligator.
And it is alligator from Fantasia. There are two different things. Any scientist will tell you there's a difference between a crocodile and an alligator. I was an alligator in Fantasia, and I was a dancing alligator in Fantasia. If people who have heard my stage stories, especially around Own Your Role, I talk about this in there about how I always wanted to be a Disney dancer. That was my whole life. I wanted to do that since I was like 6 years old. Got an opportunity to audition for it when I was 18 and became a dancing alligator. And it was a 1-season job. I went, oh, I got to fulfill that dream next, because it wasn't all it was chopped up to be. But yeah, I mean, that's part of a story, right? Of like why did I do that? Why did I want to connect with to Disney and be a part of that? I have the story of sitting on the sidewalk and watching and somebody waving at me and making me feel special in that moment. It all builds a story, right? To connect to it. So I love the idea that, you're either the victim or the hero in the story typically. And I think a lot of people will even say, sometimes they'll tell a story that justifies why they're not doing something or why they can't or whatever. They have that victim mentality, but they look at it as justification. Well, of course I can't because I'm fill in the blank, because I was born poor, or because I was, my parents divorced, or blah, 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 all those reasons why. And I think also when I talk about the habit of stories that don't serve us and the stories that hold us back, it's really remarkable how we are as human beings. We all know we make up stuff in our own head, but we don't fully, I think, embrace the idea that a lot of the times they're BS. A lot of times they're not real. They're just made up stories.
BS, it's our belief system, right? I got that from
yeah, true. Yeah. Speaking of that, my brother, it's funny too, because then we have two different stories going on, right? My brother and I grew up in the same household, went through the same experience. He's 5 years older than I am, 6 years older than I am. And he's old, we'll just say that. He's old. Okay. He's an old crotchety man. And he was at one of my seminars once, and I was telling the story of when my mom told us they were going to get a divorce. And I associate it with ice cream because we were eating ice cream at the time. He comes to me at the break and he's like, wow, that's interesting. He goes, that is not how I remember that going down. And then my other brother and he had been pulled aside earlier, talked to by my mom and dad before they told the two youngest. And, I was like, what are you talking about? And that happens so often where people will live in the same household, experience the same thing, and it'd be completely an opposite reality to them. So yeah, it's interesting how stories can shape us. Where do you see, and when it comes to business, right? Where do you see it most important for people to really understand or to be able to express that story? Because you can't always tell your full long story, right? But where do you find it most important for people to be able to say, hey, let me tell you this story about this thing? Are there certain situations where you feel they're best to pull out or serve people better? Hey, there's no reason to learn how to own your role on your own. If you like that clip, go ahead and click right here for another one. Or if you want to watch the entire podcast, go ahead and click right here. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.